Good afternoon, everybody. I want to start the Select Board amended agenda for today, August 6, 2020. Before we get started, just going to wait a couple of ground rules here. We have to read before every meeting regarding remote participation in the guidelines. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the Open Meeting Law, General Law, Chapter 38, Section 18, the Governor's March 15, 2020 order imposing strict limitations on the number of people that may gather in one place, the various boards and committees representing the town of Grafton will conduct their public meetings and hearings via remote participation. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted. We will be using Zoom meeting for this call. I just want to remind everybody, please, that all participants entering the meeting, please make sure you have your names, first and last name spelled out for you, including in the attendees, if anyone is to wish to ask a question. If we don't have a name, first and last name in the attendees for Q&A, you will not be recognized. Real quick, just we're going to be using, if you share your screen, just please note that it is going to be viewed and available by the public. So please be careful with anyone who's sharing your screen that it will be made available to the public as this meeting is being recorded. Just addition some other ground rules. Ms. Doreen DeFazio, our vice chair, will be managing the Q&A session. We will not be answering any questions until after the committee has had a chance to fully vet and deliberate and have its discussion. So please be patient with your questions that may come in. In addition to that, as chair, I will call people to have the floor for discussion. And besides that, we won't have any comments or public announcements tonight or this afternoon. And I just want to say, thank you everyone for making it. So before we get going, we're just going to do a quick roll call of who's here today. So I'm going to read your name and please identify in the affirmative that you're present. Okay. Ms. Roy?
Roy, present.
Ms. DeFazio?
Fazio, present.
Mr. Often?
Often present.
Mr. Frisbee?
Frisbee here.
Thank you. And Peter Carlson is here. Staff present today, Ms. Rebecca Meekins?
Here.
Thank you. Okay, so let's get started here. So what we're having meeting today is regarding acting town administrator and to take action. So this is a continuation of our meeting on Tuesday when we needed to get some more information and wanted to make use of this time to look if the board wants to have enough information, have a discussion about anything that they may have learned. They've had time to read the charter, gather some additional data. So at this point in time, I would like to just open up the discussion to the board first, and then as we start discussing, then figure out what action that we may take tonight. So anyone on the board right now wish to open up? Ms. Roy, and then followed by Mr. Frisbee.
So thank you. So I did some homework yesterday, as well as had a bunch of people reach out. And I am going to be in support of bringing in an outside temporary town administrator based on the information that I found out. It's a tumultuous time right now in Grafton, right? There's a lot of political unrest, and bringing in a neutral party with experience is going to bring that steadying influence that we're really looking for right now. And I did hear from people both in support of putting Becca in this position, as well as people listing concerns. But for me, as I went through it, I kept coming back to these three main points. And the first one is I really want to protect Becca, I don't want to accidentally set her up to fail. I don't want to put her in two positions where she could spread herself too thin, navigating the learning curve, which is the TA position, and potentially put her at a disadvantage if she does apply for the TA position. I just think that I want to be mindful of that. That I know it's great and it's something that seems easy, but I think long term it could potentially be harmful to have her do that. And second would be the ATA position in general. If we move Becca over to the temporary TA position while still maintaining her full-time ATA duties, I think that really just calls into question, why do we have an ATA if one person can do everything? And then the bigger long-term picture is, what if she doesn't become our forever TA and our new TA comes in and says, hey, we just saw one person can do everything, I don't need an ATA, and accidentally shoot herself in the foot just by helping us out and filling in during that time. And I just don't want it. That's a detriment to Becca. I don't want to see that happen. And then third for me is cost. I did reach out to a consultant yesterday. It does happen all the time, bringing outside intern TAs. It's a very common practice. You don't have to hire a consulting firm. You don't have to advertise for the position. It's a really word of mouth thing. There are several candidates ready and willing to hop into this position. We would, of course, have to negotiate a contract with them. But just for a ballpark, that's going to be about $20,000 to $30,000 for an outside person to come in and fill that role for about 3 months. Now, I don't know what the cost it would be for Becca to fill that role, but if it was even close to that, it makes sense to me to bring an outside person in, because now you're getting two for that price, two people to share the workload versus one person being stretched super thin for that amount of money. I know Becca's the quick and easy answer, and for sure it makes sense in that sense, but I just don't know if quick and easy equals right, and I don't want to get this wrong. So those are my reasonings why I think we really need to be considered bringing in someone else for just to protect Becca.
All right, thank you, Ms. Roy. Mr. Frisbee.
Yeah, remind me never to go after Colleen again. I think she covered a lot of what I want to say. I sort of approached it slightly differently, but came to the same conclusion. Work backwards from what we want to see here. Obviously, again, we can't get into the reasons why we made the move that we did. But obviously there's an end result in mind. And the end result for me is to bring in the most dynamic and strong permanent town administrator that we can, someone who's forward thinking, embraces best practices, and is really going to be a leader in this community for the next decade or so. In order to do that, we want to cull from the best pool of candidates that we possibly can. Well, how do we do that? I think by making the selection process as open, fair, and transparent as we possibly can in the town. And how do we do that? By indicating to the potential pool of applicants that there is no one person who might have the inside track on the job. I think the last thing that we want to do is make the next 3 months an audition for the permanent role. So not only do I not want to see our present ATA in the temporary role, I also think, and we can discuss this maybe later, but my opinion now is whomever does get the interim job should not be a candidate for the permanent position. Another reason I feel that way is I really want to start ratcheting down. Believe me when I say this, I want to start ratcheting down the drama here. I think that we need somebody who's independent, who doesn't have any connections in town, who maybe is a little bit older, retired, has done this for decades, knows the ropes, and knows how to be a competent administrator who's just a guiding hand for the next 3 months. Have that person come in while we conduct our search. I think, it's a 9-person committee. There are going to be plenty of opinions on the search committee as it is. I don't think we need to add to the intrigue any more than is necessary. I do agree with Colleen that I don't see an upside for Becca in doing this. In fact, there's almost only downside. She moves over, becomes a full-time TA, and if she doesn't apply for the job or she doesn't get the job, we suddenly look back and say, well, why do we need an assistant town administrator at a time where money is tight? So I don't see that as a potential upside from her. There are other reasons why I don't want to see Becca fill the role. I don't think I need to get into it. I think we've discussed these things as a board over the course of the past 4 months. Those things are still very much at play for me. As far as cost goes, I agree with Colleen's analysis. From what I found out, you're looking at paying somebody between $60 and $90 an hour. Again, this isn't somebody who's going to be working 40 hours a week. The cost of this should be minimal. And again, when you go back to, what you want the end result to be, you want the end result to have a strong town administrator who embraces best practices, not an okay town administrator. And yay, we saved $18,000. That's not what we're looking for. We have an opportunity here, right now, to set the course for Grafton Town government for the next decade. This is a sneaky important meeting, and I think it all really starts here. So I want to have just a really clear-headed discussion about what the end goal is, and pursue the best possible version of Grafton Town government that we can, given the resources that we have. That's it.
Thank you. Mr. Fazio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, I think my colleagues have made some good arguments about, not having Becca step into the role, but I have some concerns and some questions for discussion I wanted to bring up, which is why I would be in favor of having Becca in the role. And a couple of those things are the level of consistency in the office. I actually spent some time yesterday walking around town hall and talking to department heads, and without giving names away, asking them, would you rather report to a consultant or to Becca? And all of them said Becca, that I spoke to. And the second thing is a learning curve for the interim. So, if we were to go with an interim, one of my concerns is, picking up where we are. We have a lot on our plates right now, and I know we wouldn't be losing Becca as an ATA. I understand that if we kept her in the ATA role, but my concern about, having that learning curve of the person in charge for those 3 months, and obviously not a candidate, it sounds like, for the full-time job. So how would we handle that with staff? What would that look like organizationally? Because I have a big concern about, the overall staff morale in general, and, just want to bring that into the discussion.
Thank you. Mr. Often.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Becca. Becca, I'd like to hear from you a couple of things. I expressed my concern earlier in the week around the burden of taking on effectively two, FTE roles. And I'd like to hear you articulate, I guess, what you think those additional duties would be that are I guess I'd call them the minimum viable. Like, what's that minimum set of duties that you'd be bringing on from Tim? What are the things that you would necessarily need to maybe offload or delegate in your current set of roles in your position, and to sort of tease out the question of do we need an ATA if you're capable of doing both jobs for 6 months? I'd be interested in if you have some thoughts around something's going to suffer, right? If we actually do need an ATA, then something is going to be, it's either not going to happen over the next 6 months, 3 months, however long that is, or there's going to be a degradation in quality, I guess. So maybe you can just speak to that a little bit. And the other thing that I have some concerns about myself is just having the boss also be the HR person. So I have a grave concern about where in the version where you become our temporary TA, now lots of people report to you, but you're also the person that they would go to for an interpersonal conflict. So, how do we handle that, and how do we have some assurance for that person? What do they do if they have an issue with you, for example, to just kind of tease it out, and are they going to feel comfortable So I'd like to just hear from you on those 2 points to help me kind of understand operationally how this could work.
Sure. Yeah, so I want to, it's funny, I heard Colleen say, can one person, can they do everything? Is it realistic? And I guess I want to start out by saying that no, one person can't do anything, or one person can't do everything. And Tim didn't do everything, and I don't do everything. No organization succeeds on the backs of just one or two people. That's just not how it works. There is a team of dedicated professionals working in the municipal center every single day. They know about the current situation. I mean, obviously, as evidenced by the conversations that Mr. Fazio has had. We've been supporting each other through the transition. And I know that if I need to lean on them for additional support, that they're going to step up, because they always have and they always do. And I have full confidence and faith in the staff that work for the town of Grafton. They're dedicated and they will step up. And they've indicated to me that they're prepared to support me in whatever way that I need. So, I just want to start out by saying that it's not a one or a two person job by any stretch. I guess, Matt, I'm going to work backwards a little bit. Start with HR. I know the board is aware that we moved from part-time to full-time with our analyst position. Joan Chase this year, for the first time, she's full-time. Given the current situation, that really couldn't have come at a better time. So, the natural progression of things is that we were already starting to offload a lot of the HR duties that were in the assistant's office that now sit with Joan. The interpersonal conflicts, so now she's going to be that first step. She's going to have to walk through the progressive disciplinary process until it escalates to the town administrator, and that depends on whether it's a bylaw non-union employee or whether it's a contracted employee. So but that was a transition that was occurring naturally anyway, because she was gaining more hours and she was going to start taking on a bigger role in HR, whether or not we were in this situation today. Negotiations, we're a few months out on our administrative union, so that's a big piece of this. We're 1 year out on the police contract. I'm going to continue to lean on Mark Terry and Labor Council like we do through negotiations no matter what. I mean, these are people and resources that have supported this organization for many years. They have a background of knowledge, and they're going to continue to support me in my role as assistant or temporary or acting or whatever it might be, because I have established relationships with these people and they understand. They read the news. They know what's going on. Economic development, that's been a huge goal of this board for as long as I've been involved in the town of Grafton. And it feels like we've finally, broken through the gate here. We have 8 Pine Street that the board just signed, a process that I was involved with from the very start. And I'm committed to seeing that through in whatever capacity I'm in. I have established relationships with the stakeholders in that process today, people that are calling me about the due diligence period. I want to see that through to make sure that we're on board for a late spring 2021 transfer so we can get that money in the general fund. Today we put the finishing touches on the 27 Upton Street RFP. I work closely with John Allen and Chris McGoldrick in the planning office, and we're going to put the bow on that. And we're going to approach that the same way we approached 8 Pine Street, put it out to bid, put together a group, review proposals, and hopefully we'll have a great mixed use development right off the common with a retail component and affordable housing to prepare the board for a signature. And, I don't want to be presumptuous, but I'm thinking winter, November, December, if things stay on track. And again, I'm here and I'm doing these things today, and I'm going to do them today, whether or not I'm an assistant or I'm a temporary. So, we just keep moving forward. That's what we do. That's what the staff does. The noise is in the background, and, we all have our goals and we set our goals and we just keep moving forward. So I just want to, we have Main Street going on. Oh, I'm going to keep going if that's okay.
Well, I'm interested in, you said that not everything is going to get done. I know that I couldn't do my boss's job and my job. And I'm wondering, what are some of the things that you see would suffer or just wouldn't get done, for a period of time?
I don't think I said that things wouldn't get done, but I don't think that things won't get done. I think they may just take longer to do. I think realistically, it just may take longer time to get to things. I would ask for, I will probably need additional administrative resources. Joanne Duncan is part-time right now. And if we're talking about having this office, if I'm talking about taking on the role of temporary, I'll probably need additional hours for her, realistically. So
Okay.
that will be a cost.
Yeah.
And, so that's upfront, and I've had that conversation with her. She's prepared to take on those additional duties and hours, however they may come. So, that is one thing that would obviously, impact financially, budgetarily, and organizationally. But, I could keep going about all I know you guys know that I'm involved and that I know the stakeholders and that things are moving forward. But, to keep it short and sweet, I'm going to rely on the resources and the staff like I do all the time. And they're going to keep showing up, and they're going to keep, meeting and exceeding expectations just like we do every day. So I wish I'd had more time to honestly prepare for this discussion, because given the way Tuesday went, I honestly didn't think I was going to be having this conversation today. But, it's not just one person, it's not just two people, it's a team of incredibly dedicated staff and professionals that I work with every day that are going to support me and are going to help me succeed and are going to put Grafton in a better position tomorrow than it is today. So that's all I'll say.
Thanks.
Thanks. So, Ms. Roy.
I just have a follow-up question to Ms. Meekins about that. All of those resources, support staff and professionals that want to help Grafton succeed, do you not think that they would also support a temporary interim TA?
No, I'm not. I don't want to speak for the staff or on behalf of the staff. I only know what they've told me, and people have already come up to me and said, whatever you need, I'm here. So I can only, that's all I can speak to.
Peter, I think you called on me, but you were on mute. Yes? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a follow-up discussion question for the board too. So Mr. Prisby mentioned, not having a full-time role for the temporary TA too. And so I just want to clarify, would this be are we envisioning a 40-hour week, or are we envisioning a 20-hour week? And if so, does that make it, because for me, like having 20 hours of work, let's say, or the important things that get done, like the ability for the current ATA to make appointments, sign payroll, things like that, we're not giving her an additional full-time job. So I just want clarity on what are we actually looking at here? Are we looking at 2 full-time jobs, or are we looking at a current ATA also taking over some responsibilities and compensated? Because I sort of feel like this discussion might be going in 2 different directions, and I want to make sure that we're covering all our bases here.
Yeah, I mean, as the charter points out, the temporary town administrator only has certain duties that are delegable to that person, and how often that person works or how many hours that person works per week are negotiable depending on the circumstances. We would have to ultimately interview people, have the person that we choose get a feel for it and talk to them about how many hours per week that they would be working. But what I just heard from Rebecca is that there are a lot of things that would end up slowing down that we don't necessarily need to have slowed down at this point. We are coming up to, believe it or not, just another town meeting. This one's going to be in October. The last one was in June. We were able to do it outside. I don't know what we're going to do this time. So it seems like we don't need anything. We don't need anything to be slowed down at this point. And much as I enjoy people, coming together and pulling their weight, that leads me to just want to have a larger conversation about the structure of the office itself. To me, either you have enough employees who can come together and pull their weight and you want to streamline and make efficiencies, or these need to be two larger positions. And, you know, I appreciate all the work that Becca does and is doing. And what she just said right there was a very eloquent pitch, I think, for the big chair, ultimately. And, you know, if I were her, you know, go for it, you know, make the application. But again, all the more reason why you want to separate the two things. I don't want, and I think we shouldn't want, the temporary town administrator auditioning for the big job. I think that kills the pool of applicants going forward. So, yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Mr. Fazio.
Thank you. Just a follow-up to that. It does definitely answer the question, and you know, I see your perspective. I also would argue that, you know, we put an assistant town administrator in a position to be prepared for moments like these, and to put someone into a temporary position that to see whether or not they could take on the role is beneficial to the town. I guess there's two sides to it, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, and just again, just to respond to that, that's you know, two different perspectives. That's exactly not what I'm looking for. You know, look, we moved away from the past administration for a reason, and we have an opportunity here, I think, to pursue the end goals of this move, which I think are better communication. I think more an embrace of best practices, in embrace of planning, and embrace of dealing with volunteer boards, all those things. And we owe it to ourselves, you know, to really cast a wide net and interview candidates. If at the end of the day, Becca is the best candidate, so be it. You know, that's up to the search committee, and also up to this board ultimately at the end to cull from their list. But I think my personal opinion, I feel very strongly about this. You want to stay away from having someone in this role auditioning for the permanent job.
Mr. Often.
Yes, thank you. I just want to be very, very clear, crystal clear on that point. That I don't see the temporary town administrator, if the board were to move forward with Becca in that role, as auditioning for anything. I see those as very distinct, and I guess, Becca, I want to be very clear with you on this specifically. I don't see the temporary TA, if we were to put you in that role, as a path or any kind of advantage to becoming the town administrator. So for me, I don't see, you know, a disbenefit, I guess, to putting Becca in that role in terms of either favoring or disfavoring her as we think about our forever TA. So for me, this isn't a pathway. It's a very distinct role that we need right now. And my decision making is very much based on other things, not our forever TA and what we need for that. So I just want to be very clear about that. And I guess ask Becca if you're just comfortable with the idea that you could become a temporary TA, and then, you know, we go through a whole search process, we interview a bunch of candidates, and then would you be happy then reverting to an ATA role should we choose another town administrator? Because one of the things that I'm concerned about in this whole process is stability. You know, we have separated with Tim at this point. We've lost all of that institutional knowledge. A lot of that institutional knowledge and all of the in-process activity and the relationships, that sits with our assistant now. And so now and after we hire, you know, whoever our forever TA is, we need that. I think we need that institutional knowledge. So I guess I'd be interested in if you'd be comfortable in that, you know, with that scenario, Becca, where we made you temporary TA, you know, interviewed a bunch of candidates, and then you were to revert back to to assistant town administrator after we hire somebody else?
I guess I would say that the board should choose the most qualified candidate based on the merits for the permanent position. And whether that's me as the temporary or that's some other person, then that's the board's decision.
Ms. Roy?
So just to go back, I don't think that really answered Mr. Often's question. Would you be okay reverting back to an ATA position and working under another permanent town administrator?
If I'm not chosen for the position because the board feels that I'm not the most qualified candidate, then naturally I would revert back to my assistant position. Yeah, that's correct.
But
Okay.
would you be okay
I
with
guess
it?
I want to make sure that you're not going to be disgruntled and leave.
Guys, I'm
That-
sorry. I just want to try to make sure we get, just one at a time. Mr. Prisby, I think you were first, and then Mr. Often.
Yeah, I mean, so the way the search process goes is, there's going to be a committee of 9 people and they're going to call applications. So even if you are temporary town administrator and you wanted the role, that would have to be communicated to the search committee. They would have to either accept or reject you. If it ultimately at the end of the day, you didn't get the role, I guess what Matt's asking is, would you still be assistant town administrator? Would you still want to be?
That depends on a lot of things. I mean, I don't even know how to answer that question. I mean, there's a lot of assumptions being made. The first, that I would be even interested in the permanent position, which, I'm not saying yes right now. I'm not saying no. I'm just saying, anything's possible. And I don't really want to try to make assumptions about where I'm going to be at 6 months down the road in this position, acting, having applied for the permanent position. I just feel like I don't want to say something that turns out later to be untrue, because I've told you guys here that I'll stay. If I feel differently in 6 months, I might, I don't know. There's way too many unknowns for me to answer that question right now, honestly.
Okay. Yeah, so I've got, Mr. Often, did you have anything else?
No, I'll let the conversation play out.
So, a couple things I wanted to mention. Listening to a lot of questions, and some of you had asked the same questions that I wanted to ask. I want the board to consider just what is it that Grafton really truly needs right this very moment, and what is the, I guess the follow-up to that is, what is the likelihood that bringing in an outside interim temporary TA to work 3 days a week, essentially, I just want to ask the board, like, okay, what value is that going to bring? And are we really duplicating things? Because for someone to come in, usually I see that person, that role come in when you don't have an assistant town administrator in place, or you don't have someone who is qualified to be able to facilitate the day-to-day to get us from point A to point B. So you really look at I really look at the temporary and the acting TA as more of like a bandage to get us to be healed and then put the permanent appointment in place. So I want to ask the board, like, few of us have talked about this. What is the, what is it that you expect that an interim is going to do that, our existing assistant TA can't do? I guess it's an open question.
Right off the bat, a steadying, guiding hand. There are people out there who do this for a living. Literally, people who have been in this business for decades, not a couple of years, who have done this, who have been put in this role time and time again, who do this as a profession. We are not the first community in either central Massachusetts or all of Massachusetts to go through this transition. There are people who do this for a profession. And what they do is they, as you said, put a bandage on this thing, become an experienced guiding hand that can lead an organization through a transition, and for our sake, and a little bit of drama. Because, just to put it out there, there are a lot of hurt feelings over this. And I'm getting a little bit sick and tired of the camps. you know, one camp or another. You know, Frisbee's a good guy or Paget's a good guy. I'm tired of it. I'm tired of the recrimination back and forth. I want someone who's going to be in that role for 3 months who has no skin in the game whatsoever. No connection to me, no connection to you, no connection to anyone in this room, no connection to anyone outside of this room. Someone who is strictly a professional, who is going to be there for us in a time of need, who can help Rebecca and guide us through what is sure to be on its own a transition that is going to have all eyes focusedly squared on us. Okay, we need a strong professional who has done this before to be in that spot. That's what Grafton needs right now. What it doesn't need is more intrigue and more guesswork about who's going to get the next gig.
Just a follow-up to that, as I asked that question, thanks, Ms. Frisbee, for answering it. So, you know, the part that I wanted to know is that in your research and going out there and finding people who've done this, in your brief conversations that you may have had since this all transpired, what has your feedback been on communities where these individuals have come in to be the bandage, for lack of better words? I coined that, my bad. But, you know, that had assistant town administrators.
I don't know. We didn't get that specific. Some towns have them, some towns don't. I mean, when we were doing the GSC stuff, we did a brief survey of communities surrounding us. Of the communities that the Commonwealth identifies as sister communities, I almost said DOE, but it's DOR. About half of those have assistant town administrators. So, you know, there are people who would be interested in this, and I can't get into specifics about who they are until we decide that we're going to move forward with this. Because again, what people have to understand about the search process in public life is that, you know, it's not just what our expectations are, Peter and Matt, it's what the candidates' expectations are. So Matt, when you say that, you know, you don't consider it an audition for the permanent role, well, that's nice and everything. But what do the candidates who are looking at this from the outside consider it to be? You're not going to start putting your name in a hat if you don't really think you have an honest shot at the gig. There were people who were really upset when they found out that Jay Cummings went interviewed someplace else. I don't think those people should have been upset. I think that's up to Jay where he wants to work, but people got upset nonetheless. People were upset when they found out Tim went someplace else interviewed. I don't think people should have gotten upset, but they did. And people in public life know that. So you better be sure if you're going to go for another job that you get a shot at getting it. And that's the image that we would put out there is that, yeah, there is somebody that has an inside track, whether she's going to apply or not. You know, she doesn't even know if she's going to, which is fine for her. Like I wouldn't know either. So yeah, there are a lot of different things to consider from that perspective.
Mr. Fazio. And then Ms. Roy, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Colleen.
Colleen had her hand up first. I apologize. Yeah.
I was writing my notes, so I didn't forget. Thank you. Ms. Carlson, you wanted to know what the value of bringing someone in is. And for me, the value is, you know, Ms. Meekin said it herself, this is not a one-person job. So having an experienced, seasoned person in here, especially when we have town meeting coming up, is going to be the value right there. And it also preserves the ATA role. I think moving her out of that role, it calls that whole role into question, and I think that those are some pretty valuable things right there.
You know, Ms. Roy, and this is, I think, where maybe, you know, you and I have a fundamental disagreement on organizational structure and, you know, in overall management, and that's fine. I respect your position on that, by the way, and Mr. Frisbee's. I personally don't feel that way. And, you know, the more I've been thinking about this over the past almost a week now, and how I feel that, you know, I remember when this town first got its, you know, when it advertised for the assistant town administrator job, it wasn't without a lot of controversy. Okay, a lot of people, to your point, all asked the questions, you know, why do we need this? Like, what's the purpose? And, you know, and the typical critical things that occur within a community when you add a net new position to the municipal government. And, you know, unlike some of our other sister communities where you said half of them have, you know, assistant town administrators, you know, I really didn't get in my estimation, I don't feel like I got the answer. I got a lot of other explanation as to, you know, when they had, you know, abrupt transition, you know, did they bring in an interim while they had an assistant town administrator? And again, I don't want to pull in like what other towns have done as to like, that's the one true faith that we have to follow in order to, move forward. Again, it's a really good question to ask because, I could see where Grafton, this had occurred before, back in the, I believe it was 2010, we had a town administrator that resigned, and we didn't have an assistant town administrator at that point. And if I'm not mistaken, and I may be a little hazy on the precise details, but the select board tapped the, town accountant at the time, Ms. Fay, and she filled in for a number of months. She actually got the town through an October town meeting, and she wasn't an assistant TA. She was the town accountant. I believe the board compensated her. I don't know what the details were, but I do know that something was done to accommodate. Now, let's fast forward a little bit. That was eventually filled by, by Tim as a temporary interim position, in which then, he applied for the position, the search committee put forward, and the select board at the time awarded that contract to Tim. But moving forward, what has happened is that we now have this assistant town administrator position. And I think, to your argument by, by saying, can you do both of them? I mean, I think it's reasonable that, one of the responses, and this was Mr. Often's question and Ms. Meekin's response was that, hey, yes, I can do everything. It may take a little bit longer. I think that's reasonable. I think that's reasonable. Like when I have someone in my company who leaves, I've got to fill in. I got to fill in and cover, the duties and responsibilities. So I know that, my supervisors and my bosses are going to know that, hey, my job is going to suffer. When I was a manager, senior VP, I know that when we had people who left in key positions, everyone had to chip in and do that. But I also knew that the expectations of getting maybe some of the longer term things suffered. But then I asked myself, like, what is an outside assistant TA going to do to facilitate and move those forward if they're only here a few days a week? So I kind of see everyone's points here, and I really do that. There's the emotional side of things in dealing with that. There's also an operational side of things, and I'm hearing different points of view. I look at this from an organizational structure and say we're very fortunate that we have an assistant town administrator, unlike a lot of other communities around here who don't have one. We have someone who is well-versed, who's worked side by side with the town administrator, unlike prior to this, where that wasn't the case. It was a department head who managed all of the different departments, with DPW, accounting, conservation, zoning, police, fire, health. And we should consider ourselves fortunate. I'm saying that we have this position. So not to go into the merits of whether, do I think we need this position or not, I look at it as, personally, I want to take advantage of what we have and not even, get into, or personally feel, because it is Ms. Meekin's ultimate decision of whether or not, does she want to apply for the position or not? And I don't think it matters. And I think that having someone step up to the temporary role and also apply is within their God-given right. And it's within Becca's right, if she wants, she maintains the assistant town administrator, that, she too would apply. So in fairness to that, I'm finding it very difficult to really draw the correlation because I've seen in other organizations who have had people inside fill as an interim, even in the private sector, and I haven't really seen that much in the public sector. So I will say that that's the one flaw in my analysis, is that in the private sector, I've seen people step into the interim role, and I've understood, you've seen people be hired outside of that, but then those people go right back to the job of what they were doing, and they stay or they leave, and that's ultimately their decision, depending upon the job satisfaction. When you're bringing in someone, eventually net new, okay, all of those cards are on the table, right? So people are going to make decisions based on, basically how they feel in the position, not necessarily, whether or not they had a leg up on it or not. So I'm finding it very hard to draw that correlation, to be honest with all of you.
But Peter, I don't mean to interrupt you, but that correlation was there. I mean, I asked around to people who were on the search committee last time, and I got it straight from their mouths that the fact that Tim had the inside track on this greatly affected the talent pool. There are people that dropped out of this. Now he got that interim role People said, hey, he's here. Why not? He's already ingratiated. And that gave him a leg up on the competition.
Mr. Prisby, let me ask you one question on follow-up on that one. Do you think Dr. Cummings was a good hire for Grafton?
You know what? That's not relevant.
No, I want to ask you this question. It is relevant, and I'm going to get to that. Do you think, yes or no, that he was a good hire for Grafton?
It's not relevant. Stick to the select board. This is exactly what happened last time.
I am talking about a
How do you
very
think it's
similar
relevant?
situation
How
that I
do you
was
think it's
involved
relevant?
I'm going
How
to
do
tell
you
you
think
why,
it's relevant?
because we had an assistant superintendent of the schools who at the last moment applied for the position. It didn't mean we had less applicant pool.
I don't know. I don't know that it did or it didn't, Peter. What I do know is I spoke to people on the search committee from last time, and they said that it did. I spoke to someone else who's a town administrator and said that it will.
All right. Mr. Fazio?
Yeah, a couple of quick points I want to make. So I'll start with, I have worked for one community that did have a consultant in place when we had a town administrator or town manager retire. And there was not an assistant in that role. But what I did see is that the consultant leaned a lot on staff, which anyone coming in on a temporary basis would do. So, you know, another thing to factor in is that, you know, we hire a consultant to come in and that person is constantly leaning on Becca, asking Becca questions. And, you know, we could have just been paying Becca to do the same work. So the other point I want to make is I just want to know with if any of you have had conversations with staff at all, because, you know, for me, the consistency and, you know, I understand what Mr. Prisby is saying about the drama, and, you know, I 100% agree with you. And, you know, I want to stop the drama now, but I think that's a responsibility of the board. I don't think it's a responsibility of staff. I think that comes from us, and that paying a consultant to stop drama it is not good reasoning for me. I think that, you know, we will, and I put myself in that position as well. And, you know, I think we need to think about the current people working in the municipal center, what they want, the consistency they want, and whether or not a consultant will be leaning on Becca. Those are just 2 points I want to make.
So to answer your question, Doreen, yes, I
I
have
know
talked to
Ms.
staff.
Royce up next, Mr. Prisby, and then you.
So as far as leaning on staff, Ms. Meekins herself has said that she would be leaning heavily on staff. So I don't know if that really matters, whether it's a temporary town administrator or if it's Ms. Meekins. Everybody, it sounds like, is going to be getting leaned on a little bit more. And I just don't know how, I just wanted to ask a question for you, Mr. Carlson. How do you feel comfortable asking Ms. Meekins to step in this role when she just said to us that you can't do it alone, that it does require more than one person? And it sounds like it wouldn't just be her that we would be paying more, but it would also be an increase in hours for Joanne. So it sounds like there's going to be money being spent regardless on if it's an interim TA or Becca and Joanne. And it just seems like, to be neutral, it's not having them come in with their sole purpose of ending the drama, but a neutral party would have that effect.
Mr. Prisby, did you have a question?
Oh, wait, but I asked you a question, Peter.
Yeah, I'll get to it in a minute, but you two had your hands up kind of simultaneously. I wanted to give Mr. Prisby a chance.
I'm all set.
Thank you. All right, I'll answer that question. So again, I think it comes down to the fundamental, you know, how the organizational structure is set up. So you bring in an interim who has absolutely no idea what's going on in Grafton. The type of leaning on of staff is going to be, I need you, Ms. Roy, to teach me everything that's going on. Wait, I'm finished. I know absolutely nothing about what's going on in here. What are the why are the, you know, and understanding how to get from point A to point B. Now, the type of leaning that you see from an existing staff member, from an organizational standpoint, if someone who's in the know and understands what's going on, the type of leaning on the staff is going to be fundamentally different because the staff that they're going to be leaning on are aware of the situations that are going on. So it's not like you're teaching someone something net new to them. What you're doing is, in one essence of looking internally versus externally, is you've got areas of efficiency that are already laid out in existence. Whereas bringing in someone outside, and again, I see the merits of both of these arguments, but bringing in someone outside into your answer, I think, is inefficient. And the only reason why you would choose, in my opinion, the way that I would choose it, the only way you choose one over the other is if We didn't have anybody in the town who knew how to operate and run the things that need to be done, which had happened before in Grafton. That occurred.
But the
This is
person we
different.
have, the person we have is saying it's not a one-person job. The person we have is saying she herself would lean very heavily on staff. Just because she has relationships with them does not mean that they would have less work. And the person we brought in wouldn't just be some Joe Schmo. It would be a professional that does this for a living. So the leaning on staff could potentially even be less because they know how to do it. They've been in the role before, and there is no TA learning curve.
Mr. Fazio, Mr. Hoffman.
I asked a question before that like an answer to of, whether or not those of you who are opposed have had conversations with staff. But the other thing is, I've applied for positions, ATA positions, assistant city manager positions, and have been finalists in communities. And, typically in that search process, whether there's a temporary person filling in that's an ATA, or there's already an ATA in place, or someone next in line in that community, I would go and say, oh, well, this person already works there and probably has qualifications, so I know I'm going to be competing against them. So I guess the clarification I'm trying to make is whether or not we put Becca in this role. If someone like me was to apply to a position in town, I would look at the ATA as a threat for the position, whether or not she's the temporary. So maybe she's not the temporary, but she applies for the position. I don't think it's a solid argument to not put her in the position because we're worried about the search committee. I mean, we haven't formed, the search committee is very different now than it was 12 years ago. So.
Mr. Fazio asked a question of the board. I just want to be able to answer that first, Mr. Prisby. So yes, in the limited amount of time that everything has transpired, I've had conversations with other staff members, both department heads and people who work within the municipality that support department heads. And I've heard, yes, so I have spoken to them and I've had, like I said, very brief conversations. I don't know if anyone else wants to answer that. Mr. Hoffman and Mr. Prisby.
Yeah, I just have a couple comments. My impression is that the drama in, that we're all speaking of, that an external consultant could be that kind of neutral party. It's not drama within the municipal center that needs to be addressed by somebody outside the organization. I don't think that that's the drama we're talking about. So for me, that's just not really a reason to bring somebody in as a neutral arbiter to kind of smooth things out. I'm interested in what the board's opinion is on, and I'm specifically interested in cost. Is it realistic? Colleen, you mentioned 20 to 30K for that consulting. Is 3 months a realistic time frame for hiring our forever TA? So I'd be interested in people's opinion on that.
Mr. Prisby.
Someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the charter spells out that it's got to be 3 months. I don't think we can carry this on for very long. But we would want to get this done pretty quickly. To answer two questions in there, I think they're sort of the same subject. Yes, Doreen, I have spoken with people in the municipal center. They were the people who most fervently reached out to me and thanked me for last week's result. So no, some of the drama that we're talking about actually does, I think, come from within the municipal center. Again, can't get into the reasons we did what we did, but it wasn't, there's an administrative philosophy here that I have been banging my head against for 5 years now, no secret. And I fervently believe that in the years to come, municipal government is going to have a harder and harder time getting through or getting by. And what we're going to need is staff, employees, and administration that understand that communication and working with volunteers, the school committee, the select board, the school department is part and parcel of the job. And no longer will we want to hear about somebody's public administration degree. And we didn't get this far in the transition, I think, to stop now and say, okay, well, we're going to take a half measure here and potentially give somebody else, again, a leg up. I'm sorry, but a leg up on the position when we have the opportunity here to really pursue the best version of Grafton government that we can get. Cost the 30 grand or whatever it is, that's not a concern for me. The concern for me is expanding the pool of applicants and really pursuing doggedly and unapologetically the end goal of getting the absolute best administration in here that we can. Now, if at the end of the day that turns out to be Becca, so be it. Apply and interview like everybody else is going to interview. But in the meantime, we have the opportunity to calm some nerves and have somebody who has been doing this for decades and who does it for a living come in and do it just like they do it everywhere else, Mr. Carlson, everywhere else. There's nothing particularly special about the situation that we're in. Other communities have done this before, and this is exactly what they do.
Anybody else? Ms. Roy?
I know you started the meeting by saying you wanted to take action, but would it be beneficial for the board to bring in one of those professionals so you can hear from them on what it's like to come into a community temporarily?
Question, answer that question, Ms. Roy. I guess it depends on what the outcome of today is. Yeah, but yes, it would be dependent on the outcome. Yep. Anybody else have anything? All right. Mr. Fazio, I think we have one question out in the Q&A.
Thank you, Mr. Carlson. Okay, Sherilyn Reno from 89 Keith Hill Road wants to know, with Becca staying on as assistant TA, theoretically, couldn't she be the person who is the primary contact with the staff and temporary person manage the less personnel heavy aspects of the job? Do you want me to answer that?
Sure. Or
Yeah,
I don't know how I answer that question, but go ahead.
Yeah, I guess theoretically that's an option. And it's also theoretically an option that Becca would do the work and take on. That's the point of the discussion.
I have to agree. Every time I see theoretically in the question, I always think it's rhetorical, but yeah, I agree. Yep. Anybody else? So a couple things I wanted to bring up. I'm sorry, what?
Never mind. Go
Becca,
ahead.
please.
I just wanted to point out really quick, the question refers to personnel matters, and I just want the board to tread carefully that the charter defines the role of the town administrator, temporary or acting. So, there's not a lot of space there to sort of offset, give those duties to someone else. So, I think it's a good question and it's worth thinking about, but, the charter does define the role. That's the important piece.
Right. Okay. So I think there's a couple other parts I wanted to bring to your attention. I asked Ms. Meekins to just provide us with just a brief financial analysis that's relevant to the discussion that we're having. Ms. Meekins, could you kind of give us just an overview of the question I asked earlier today, was just where were we financially after the settlement agreement, and where are we? I think that's for your guys' benefit as well.
Sure. So Peter had asked me to do a brief analysis based on the agreement that the board worked out with the prior town administrator of where our current funding lies for personnel and town administrator line item. So after the checks that were cut, the current balance of the personnel line for town administrator related costs is negative $17,531. Peter posed it to me, sort of what, do we have any funding available to bring on a firm? Not in the personnel line. We're gonna have to look to balance that line in October, and then obviously, increase funding in October if you were to negotiate an agreement with a new town administrator moving forward. And if you were to bring on a firm, you could potentially use professional and technical dollars in the town administrator's budget. But those dollars are earmarked throughout the year for other projects. So again, in October, you would have to fund that line moving forward so that we could do those projects. There is also the option of the Finance Committee Reserve Fund. They do have a $75,000 allocation that the board could certainly make a request for to fund some of this interim service that you're referring to. But again, you would likely want to possibly, fund that again in October so that the Finance Committee is whole in the event that something else were to come up. So, the board has a couple options, but as of today, there is not really any funding readily available that won't need to be replenished in October.
All right, thank you. Anyone have any questions on that? Mr. Prisby?
More just a comment. I don't think that is particularly material to the discussion because that's going to happen either way. Rebecca's going to get a stipend if she for the delta of the responsibilities should she take the role. So I don't find it particularly persuasive about what we should be doing with this based on that information. When again, I keep coming back to this. This could affect the ultimate outcome of what we end up doing 3 months from now. And so, that delta, I'm not willing to be penny wise, but pound foolish on this.
Okay.
So,
Mr. Roy, Ms. Roy.
go ahead, Ms. Roy.
So I guess I just would like to know what the stipend for Becca would be and what the increase in hours would be for Joanne, because if it's close to the same price as an outside consultant, it just makes sense to me to do the outside consultant, because now you're getting two for the same price, right? We're getting one person that'll be stretched out to the max who's already said it's more than a one-person job, or we have two people and a professional to help balance the extra work for the same amount of money. That just makes complete sense to me.
Mr. Often.
Yeah, I guess, can we just agree as a board that the cost of bringing somebody in external versus Becca plus Joanne extra hours is roughly equivalent? And I don't see that as a big sort of driver for this decision. I must admit, Ed, I'm swayed by your argument in terms of our applicant pool. I have some concerns about that, and I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense to me. It's interesting how these conversations go. I had a certain idea coming into this meeting, but setting ourselves up for the future, really, it's important. Every step that we take at this stage has to be deliberate and very thoughtful. And I don't want to get this wrong. That's all I have to say for the moment.
So, Mr. Prisby, I agree with you that the balance here is not really bearing, and I agree. But I do think it's important. Just we know what next steps that we're going to have to do to fund this account to really kind of pay out anybody for that matter. Just know that we've got some work to do for here in October to replenish this account, regardless, really, of how this goes this evening. So does anyone else have any other questions? Mr. Often.
I guess in thinking about the scenario where we brought somebody in from outside, I still do have some concerns about retaining Becca. Because if we decide to make Becca a temporary town administrator, we're voicing our sort of faith in her ability to do this, this temporary role. If we decide to bring somebody in, it's kind of a little bit of the opposite is true as well. And I guess I'd like some assurance that we can have some continuity. I don't want to upset the apple cart more in the municipal center. And I have some concerns about that.
All right. Anybody else? All right, so I think at this point, I don't see any, well, there's a couple of questions, Mr. Fazio. I think this will be the last round of questions from outside. If you want to go through that.
Sure thing. Justin Wood, 5 Garden Street, commentary, not question. My position has changed since Tuesday. I'm placing Becca as temporary TA. I agree with the reasons why we may want someone new to Grafton on the role of temporary TA. I look forward to the future discussions and outcome here. Cheryl Reno again. I just want to thank the board and Ms. Meekins for your answers.
Okay, great. All right, so at this point, what is the board's wish? Mr. Frisbee.
Again on Tuesday, let's bring in some applicants. Like Colleen said, you don't have to advertise for this. You can do it word of mouth, although word is out. And then, get those, resumes, CVs to you by, well, what is today? Thursday? By Monday. I mean, we could put something on the agenda, then amend the meeting packet shortly before that. I think that's really the only option at this point.
Okay, Mr. Fazio.
I have some concerns about that. So in particular, I think that we are, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we don't have that kind of time because I think our current acting town administrator is leaving on vacation. And so that leaves us with nothing for a week or two and no one to be able to appoint. So I'd like to make a motion to have Rebecca Meekins be our temporary town administrator.
I have a motion.
Question.
I have a motion. Do I have a second before we go into discussion? Do I have a second on the motion?
I'll second it so we can go to discussion.
Thank you. Motion made and seconded. Mr. Frisbee.
Yeah, sorry, just a question. So then even if you make her the temporary town administrator, she's still going on vacation next week. That doesn't really solve that problem.
Mr. Fazio and then Ms. Roy.
Yeah, maybe Becca can clarify the details of this in both scenarios. Obviously there's a motion I just made on the floor, but in both scenarios, what are we looking at here? If we didn't appoint you or we appointed you today, what would both scenarios look like?
So the board hasn't taken any action on appointing any acting or temporary position as of right now. I've been, doing the work, muddling through, kind of waiting for the board to make a decision about this. So as of right now, I'm gonna leave tomorrow for vacation for a week, and I don't have power to appoint anybody acting town administrator. So you will, in effect, be without anybody in that position. You will I recommend at the very least that you appoint somebody acting town administrator today so that that person can, fulfill the duty, which is really at the bare minimum, sign the payable warrant for next week. So that's all.
Any other question? Ms. Roy.
Is there somebody that you would recommend that we could appoint? Is it the fire chief or somebody else within the municipal center that could be the acting while you're away on vacation?
Yeah, I mean, I would, I guess I would say that the board should probably approach that person and ask them if they're willing to take on that role. I don't know how to answer that, honestly.
I guess another follow-up question, has this ever happened in the past where you and Tim were both off on the same day?
No.
Any other question, comment, discussion? Mr. Fazio?
Yeah, if we have to formally advertise for a consulting position, Becca, does that have to advertise for 14 days before we could choose somebody?
According to the bylaws, for openings, yeah.
Ms. Roy?
From what I understand, we do not have to advertise for an interim town administrative position. That's what the consulting group told me. I don't know if our bylaw is different, if a temporary position needs to be advertised, if it's treated the same way.
Yeah, that's why I asked the question, Colleen. I'm unclear on that. I think our bylaws say that it's 14 days, so it sounds like, Becca, it is.
Right, any other discussion? All right, I have a motion made and seconded. Okay, we're going to a vote, roll call, say Ms. Roy,
Roy, nay.
Mr. Fazio,
Fazio, aye.
Mr. Often,
Often nay.
Mr. Frisbee,
Okay.
Frisbee nay, and Peter Carlson is, yes, yay in the affirmative. All right, so I declare the motion defeated, 3-2. Okay, so I guess at the next part here, we don't have anyone with the designation of acting town administrator. Therefore, that person, can't be appointing anyone in their absence to take over those duties in an emergency. So at this point in time, we don't have anybody else on staff that we know reach out to. So I think at this point, we're just going to have to go into our next meeting and bring this up again. And to your point, let's, I have this feeling that with the 2-week notice, I'm a little confused on that as well. I'm trying to remember what we did before and how that worked. I'm not quite sure if the town went out and advertised for a couple of weeks and then had to fulfill its bylaw, or were they able to just, to your point, Ms. Roy, based on a consultant who's not read our bylaw, can we, just go out and appoint? So I think there's some questions I want to get some clarification for the board, and if the board is fine with that, I'd like to just kind of get a final ruling so we're not violating our own bylaw. Mr. Frisbee.
Question, we can't just make a motion to appoint the police chief, the acting town administrator at this point?
So I think you can, but I'm not sure of what Chief Crapo's schedule is like. I mean, what if he is taking time off next week and he's not here? So we have a lot of unknowns here, which is, it is what it is. So, Mr. Fazio.
Mr. Chairman, through you, to Becca, did you, if you were appointed as acting, did you have someone in mind and have conversations? Because my thought is, if the board were to make Becca acting until we hired a consultant, and Becca has already had conversations with someone that she could appoint acting in her absence, then at least we have someone that staff is reporting to over this next week or two or whatever it is with, while we figure out how to advertise and get a consultant. So Becca, do you have any conversations with staff? You don't have to tell us who, I just wanted to know.
Yeah, I've talked to staff.
All right. Okay. So I think at this point, does anyone else have anything they want to talk about? I think we're on to Tuesday. Mr. Fazio. And then Mr.
Yeah,
Ms. Roy.
I'd like to make a motion to make Becca acting town administrator so she can appoint an acting town administrator.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Okay. Any discussion on the motion? Mr. Frisbee.
So is this just, oh, sorry.
Mr. Frisbee first and Ms. Roy, sorry.
No, sorry, I think I'm going to ask the same question Colleen was about to ask. Just wanted to clarify for my own benefit, and I think for the benefit of the people who are going to be watching. I think sometimes we go back and forth between these terms, acting and temporary, and they are terms of art under the charter. So if I could ask what everybody's understanding here is of acting, I think it's specifically a temporary role under the charter that gives the authority of that person the power to make appointments at the time, which would allow Becca to appoint somebody else to act as acting town administrator in her stead. Correct?
That is correct, Mr. Brizzi. That's how I interpret it. Mr. Fazio?
That's how I interpret it too. And so my thought is just so we're not left with, not having conversation and nobody until Tuesday. And, the board has decided we're moving ahead with a consultant. So we have time to look at the bylaws, plan that for Tuesday's meeting, but we have a seamless plan in place until then. That was my
Okay.
thought.
Is it possible to put a term on this motion for a period of 1 week?
Sure.
I would probably go a little bit longer than a week, Mr. Frisbee, because that puts us to next Thursday.
10 days?
I
12 days?
I would just do 14 days in my estimation. That would be my recommendation.
So should I change my motion, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, you can amend your motion and then Mr. Often can second the amendment based on that.
Okay. So my amended motion is that we appoint Rebecca Meekins as acting town administrator for a term of 14 days.
Second.
Okay, I've got a motion, amended motion made and seconded. Any further discussion on the motion? I think just, oh, Ms. Roy, sorry. Yep.
So my understanding is that an acting or a temporary town administrator only has the appointing authority in an emergency situation. Is being out of town a week considered an emergency situation?
So I have another part of that I want to read to you, and this is what's called the delegation of authority. That's under the town administrator. It's section 4.3. The town administrator may authorize any subordinate officer or employee to exercise any power to perform any function of duty which is assigned to the office of the town administrator, provided, however, that all acts performed under such delegation shall at all times be deemed to be the acts of the town administrator. Because we're calling this, an acting town administrator, they will have all the powers and duties. The only piece of this is when it comes to the appointment piece of it, is that if they are temporary, to your point, okay? It can't be permanent. So the TA can't permanently appoint someone to be the next TA. Does that make sense? And in the sense that an emergency occurs, I think that could be anything you could think of that would constitute an emergency. That's how I interpret it.
So going out of town for a week is considered an emergency. That's why we need to appoint someone. I'm just wondering, is it a big deal to not have anyone in the role for a week? We've kind of gone through a week at this point already.
So I think there's two pieces of this, Ms. Roy, that I'm looking at, and that is we have a vacancy and we have to appoint someone who's got signatory authority, okay, that can do the things that need to be done over the next week or two, okay, while we continue this transition and get to the next step. The powers and duties, again, under a temporary acting TA, under A and B above, shall be limited to matters not admitting the delay or such include authority to make temporary emergency appointments. I see it make temporary, emergency appointments or designations to town officer employment, or employment, but not to make permanent. That powers and duties component, I think, has to deal with, like, I want to appoint a new fire chief, and in an acting TA, you can only do that as a temporary appointment in the event of emergency. What we're talking about here is the delegation of authority. So someone having the title of acting TA shall have all the duties and responsibilities of the TA, which is outlined in the charter. And what we're looking at here is having Ms. Meekins, upon this vote, have the ability to have the delegation of authority to then appoint an employee to fill in her and during her leave. Mr. Fazio.
Yes, so, Mr. Chairman, through you to Ms. Roy, I would say it would be an emergency situation not to have anyone in the town administrator's office for an entire week. I mean, you never know what's going to go on in a community, and we need leadership in the role. So somebody needs to be appointed to the position. And in my opinion, if we don't want to do that, I'd like to hear what the plan B is, but I guess it would fall on us.
Mr. Chair, if I may, really quick, just so, in the interest of full transparency, so the board has all the information, there is a piece of the charter that speaks about the duties of the CFO, and in the vacancy of the office of the town administrator, those duties automatically revert to the select board. So I referred to the signing of the payable warrant, obviously. That is a duty of the CFO, which, as I said, in the vacancy of the office of the town administrator, the board does control. So just so you have all the information.
All right, I have a motion made and second. Any further discussion? All right, hearing none. All those by roll call vote. Ms. Roy,
Aye.
Mr. Fazio,
Fazio, aye.
Mr. Often,
Often aye.
Mr. Prisby, Mr. Prisby, do I have a vote? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Sorry, Prisby, aye.
Thank you. And Mr. Carlson, okay, declare the motion carried 5-0. Okay, thank you for that. We'll make sure we get everything situated there. All right, if there isn't any other business at this point, we'll be meeting on Tuesday, is our next regularly scheduled meeting. I'll be finalizing the agenda tomorrow with all of the remarks made at the last meeting and other business that is coming above us. Before we go, I saw a couple hands go up, Ms. Roy and Mr. Prisby.
So when do we start signaling the search committee to notify the boards and committees that have to make their appointments so that we can get that ball rolling as soon as possible? Because we are kind of on a deadline, right, of 3 to 6 months.
We're going to be talking about that on Tuesday. Yep. Mr. Prisby.
But yeah, interested parties should be sending their inquiries to whom? To us, if we reach out to them, and then to you. How do you want it to work?
I guess that's up to does the board want to appoint me to be the person who's collecting all this information and facilitate?
Sure.
Bring a motion.
Makes sense.
All right, I move that we appoint Select Board Chair Peter Carlson to collect applications and any other materials pertinent thereto, and facilitate the discussion of hiring an interim town administrator for Tuesday.
Second.
Motion made a second. Any discussion on the motion? All right, I have some questions. All right, so what you're asking me to do, just so I'm clear, is that all inquiries are going to be forwarded to me. However, I also think we need to dot our i's and cross our t's about, do we really need to have a 2-week, notice of this, okay, to be aligned with our bylaw? My only concern is I don't want to be presumptuous and based on the board's, eagerness and it's wanting to get this done very soon, which I agree that, time is of the essence for us. Is the board willing to grant me just some, leeway on getting an answer about that? And depending upon what that answer is, I'll have town council forward that to us, and we're going to be meeting on Tuesday, and then we can take any other relative action, if I have to stop what I'm doing as a result of that and explain why, or if I can continue, I'll continue doing it. But I just want to, bring
Yeah, I
that.
don't think you need a vote for that, though.
I agree. Mr. Fazio.
Yeah, I had a separate question too about advertising. Are we need to advertise as soon as possible? So that I don't know if that includes applications. There's no applications that are going to come in without an advertisement first. So that's probably a discussion that shouldn't wait until Tuesday.
Are we talking about advertising for the interim position? Because that you don't need to do,
Well,
technically.
I'm going to say this, Mr. Prisby, there is a question on that on the bylaw, okay? And I just want to get clarification. I don't want to be advertising for something and find out we did something wrong and negate any of the work and then have to delay, right? So I think in the essence of time, I want to reach out and get an opinion on that, share it with the board. If everything is copacetic and it's fine to go, then, full thruster ahead. But in light of just making sure, this is being done with the I's dotted and the T's crossed, I think with your profession, you can appreciate just making sure we're doing this right. And Ms. Roy and Mr. Fazio.
So I've never gotten an opinion from council before. Is it realistic to expect that we could get that back tomorrow? Or is that something that takes, that will take all weekend?
I don't know how to answer that question until someone respond, until I get a response and know when they can get back to me. I'm not going to answer with someone's timeline. I'll do my best to get something out tonight and get a response sooner. But if it doesn't happen by tomorrow, then I think you know the answer to that question. It didn't come in time. Mr. Fazio.
Yeah, I think asking council, but I think Mr. Prisby is probably right on this, since if we're hiring a consultant, we would just have to go through procurement process. We wouldn't have to advertise. So, but we should cross our eyes and cross our eyes.
I like that. I like that first. I've done
Yeah,
that before.
that's what we should do on this.
I don't anticipate it taking a long time. All right. I have a motion made and seconded. So just another follow-up question. So you're authorizing me to collect information, present to the board, and what's your timeline on getting this information? Do you think Tuesday's enough time? Do we have to go further?
Yeah, I would think that, based on the conversations that I've had, obviously these things tend to turn around pretty quickly. I think Tuesday's enough time. I don't think it's enough time to have a packet ready for tomorrow. I think that you're going to be looking at amending a packet on Monday.
Yeah. Okay. Any other discussion on the motion? All right. Hearing none, by roll call vote, Ms. Roy,
Roy, I.
Mr. Fazio,
Fazio, aye.
Mr. Often,
Often aye.
Mr. Prisby,
Yeah.
and Mr. Carlson, aye. I declare the motion carried. Okay. Thank you. Is there anything else that needs to be discussed? That's regard to the agenda item tonight. All right, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor by roll call vote, Ms. Roy,
Roy, I.
Mr. Fazio,
Fazio, aye.
Mr. Often,
Often aye.
Mr. Prisby,
Frisbee, aye.
Mr. Carlson, I declare motion carried. Good night, everyone. We'll be in touch. Thank you.